Hi, everyone. My name is Aaris Sherin. I'm a professor of graphic design at St. John's University in Queens, New York. And today we're going to be talking about using professional practice to get tenure and promotion. The latter didn't just like roll off the tongue, so it didn't make it into the title, but those two often go together. And for those of you who are watching this and may be looking to be promoted to full after having attained associate the first time around, we are going to touch on that a little bit. I have the pleasure of being here today with some amazing educators who have agreed to talk about their experience using professional and creative practice to get tenure and navigating different institutional expectations. And so that's what we're going to be talking about as well. We'll also hear what it's like for external reviewers to see tenure and promotion dossiers which focus on professional practice. And today is really about our panelists, so I want to jump right in. Rather than having me introduce each person and try and remember everybody's institutional affiliations, I'm going to ask our panelists to do that when they answer the first question. And sometimes I do two-part questions, so if you sort of lose your way because my question meandered on, feel free to just come back and ask me to clarify. This is a pre-recorded session for ShiftED, and so we don't have a live audience, but if any of you want to follow up on a question that I asked somebody else, or if you want to ask one of your fellow panelists a question, please feel free to jump in. This is really supposed to be a discussion, and I'm just sort of making sure we're here staying on track. So our first question is for Tashika, Meaghan, Allan, and Gökhan. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit about what the work you used to get through the tenure and promotion process, and when you were tenured, and what kinds of professional practice were recognized at your institution. And I guess I'm going to start. Tashika, I had you first on my list, so is it okay if we start with you?
I guess we have to, huh?
Great, thanks.
Hi, I'm Tashika Arsenault-Sutton. I received tenure in 2017, tenure and promotion in 2017 at Southeastern Louisiana University. I'm currently transitioning to Associate Professor of Graphic Design at NC State, where I'll be working this upcoming fall. I got tenure promotion basically based on exhibitions, to be honest, of my creative work. So it was a combination of exhibitions as well as my work was also published in a publication like Idea magazine, as well as some of my, I guess, projects I did for my design studio. So that's basically how I was able to get tenure.
And that's what was recognized at your institution, was that it was sort of pushing the professional or creative practice through the exhibition, what we would think of as the exhibition track. Is that why you did that, or was that just because that was the space you felt most comfortable in?
It's part of both. So it was the space that I felt comfortable at the time. Although I had ideas and projects for publishing, at the time I just really couldn't figure out how to make that work for me. And so using my creative work just seemed like the best way to go for me. Also, I would add that I think a lot of it depends on the dynamic of your department and the people who are gonna actually review who's on the committee. So for me, because I was, within the art department and there's only one other graphic designer on the committee, I felt like the language that a lot of the people on the committee understood was exhibitions, to be honest. And so that's why I decided to go that route.
Yeah, that's great information. And I think we'll hear from others about whether or not they were aligning with what they saw happening at their institution. Meaghan, you want to tell us a little bit about your work and getting tenure and promotion?
Sure thing. So I received tenure in the summer of 2020 from Virginia Tech. Before I was even in a tenure track position, I'd spent 3 years working as an assistant professor of professional practice, where I ran a student-run design firm. And then I was hired into a tenure track position where I spent 6 years before receiving tenure. So at Virginia Tech, they say we are 20% service, 40% teaching, and 40% research. And also we're an R1 or research one. And so even though they say it's only 40% research, you're really being evaluated on your research output when you go up for tenure. And they also compare you to peer institutions. So you might check to see if your particular institution has a similar sort of list. But I'm, I think, in a similar position to what Tashika was talking about, in that I'm in a design program inside a school of visual arts. So at the school level, I was being evaluated by primarily artists and art historians. And as such, exhibitions, juried competitions, and conference presentations and publications were easily understood. But I'm a designer who also maintains a professional practice. And what I mean by that is client work. So I had to find ways of having my client work and my personal making peer reviewed. And so sometimes I would do this by entering design competitions, and other times I would do this by contextualizing my work within broader things such as a conference paper or presenting on projects, or sometimes finding ways of exhibiting as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I think, again, you're sort of echoing some of what Tashika said about understanding the institution you're at and what they're looking for. And I would say that one of the ways for those of you who are watching who might be newer educators to figure out what a peer institution might be would be to look under the Carnegie classification of institutions, and you can type yours in through Carnegie Mellon. You can type the name of your institution in and it will show you that designation, and then you can also check what other designations are. So if you're at a conference and somebody's saying like, this is what I did, you can kind of see if they're at a similar institution, not just based on what they said, but sort of this more empirical way that institutions are evaluated. Allan, your work is somewhat similar to Meaghan's. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your work? And also you are a full professor now, so we want to hear a little bit about what you did to get tenure, and then also whether or not that changed when you went up for promotion to full.
So my name is Allan Espiritu, and I am at Rutgers University Camden campus. And I was tenured in 2009 to associate, and then in 2018, I was promoted to full. Yeah, it's interesting to hear the backgrounds of everyone and the institutions that they're at, because I feel like I've had the same challenges in some way of Tashika and Meaghan's as well, like in terms of the institution. Most of my work is professional practice. I run a full-time design studio. I opened it in 2002 when I started teaching and finished graduate school. I took on the teaching position right away, right from grad school. And I always wanted to run a studio. So I started a studio in 2002. It was only me and always an intern. But now it's a 5-person studio with 3 salaries. And, you know, and I'm still teaching full time. So a lot of the work that started from the studio, and why it started was more of like an experimental lab. And we had, you know, specific clients that I only wanted to work with. But then as we grew and gained some recognition, you know, we just started to bring in the work, and it's just kind of a full-time studio right now. So there's, yes, like I said, there's like 5 of us, and balancing the 2 worlds has always been the challenge for me, but understanding that the 2 worlds were like had a symbiotic relationship with each other, and it was really, really important. But I have to say, in the same way, I'm in a small department. I'm the only graphic designer. The graphic designer before me didn't get tenure. And then the person before that was there forever, was a painting professor that taught graphic design. So it was really challenging coming up the first time because they had expectations that I just wasn't comfortable with. They wanted exhibitions, but that's not what I did. So I had to really think about how to maneuver myself through this institution because they wanted research. So that was, I just had to kind of figure out a way to frame the professional work. Yeah, so.
And so Rutgers, Camden, for those people who aren't on the East Coast, it's a New Jersey school, but you can pretty much toss a stone and hit Philadelphia, right?
Yes,
I mean,
right.
it's very close to Philadelphia. And I would just say that, Allan, I know you also won a lot of awards. I had the pleasure of reviewing Allan's dossier for full professor and was, blown over by all of the awards that you and your studio have won. And so I'm just wondering, I know people are sometimes intimidated about that. Did you feel like winning, entering and winning awards really helped you tell the story of doing professional work at your institution?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the only way they felt that they can evaluate. It was just something that they can connect to in terms of the humanities and and they wanted peer reviewed, nonstop. They stressed it had to be anything that you did had to be peer reviewed. And it was, I thought the most logical way for my work to get peer reviewed was through competitions. And it's, as designers, we don't really, I don't think we really have that much connection to winning awards. I mean, for me, it was, again, just something that I needed to do to get get through the process, to get through the tenure process, and for other people to, outside our discipline to really understand what we do and in relation to like peer-reviewed journals and things like that. Yeah, as we all know, that's like the scariest part. People not really understanding what we do and being evaluated by people other than graphic designers, which is very much the case at Rutgers and Camden. Again, no one, even on the department level, I'm the only graphic designer. And then after that, when it goes beyond the departmental level, you have social scientists as well as, the humanities and the liberal arts, everyone evaluating your work to move it on to the main campus, to the Rutgers, New Brunswick higher board. So it's an intimidating process, but again, yeah, for me, entering competitions was something that I thought they could understand and fulfill that peer-reviewed requirement.
Yeah, thanks. That perspective is, I think, going to be really helpful for people, and also just good to know that we can enter competitions as a means to an end, right? You want to keep teaching, you want your tenure to achieve tenure and promotion, and so it doesn't have to be about somebody thinking, hey, I'm the best designer. It's really just like, hey, this is what these other people will understand and help them understand the work that I want to do, and this is just part of the process. So I really appreciate that perspective. Gökhan, can you tell us a little bit? I think you might be our newest tenure person to achieve tenure in the call, and so I wondered, that's really fresh for you. I wondered if you can talk a little bit about that process for you and how that professional practice and creative practice kind of tied in with some of the other kind of work you do.
Yep. I'm Gökhan Ersan, and I got promoted a month ago, maybe, at the Binghamton University campus of SUNY. It's a liberal arts college, research one institution, and I think I was evaluated primarily on research output, and my particular information design practice within graphic design helped me tie with research grants. And that was the #1 thing on the list was grant-funded information design work. And 3 other things, creative publications, which is artist's book, where I originated, and then related exhibitions, whether related to information design output or artist books. The 4th one, scholarly publications, which was essays and book chapters. A combination of them, I think, led me to get promoted. The special thing was that campus wanted interdisciplinary work, and it had structures in place to collect professors from across schools to apply for grants to do collaborative work. And my design work was always a collaboration within these larger projects that I'd done. Either the humanities side of things or the sciences, which the large body of work was material science, illustrating material science concepts for research communication and for pedagogical purposes.
And did you feel like, it's really interesting for me to hear that not only was your institution interested in interdisciplinary work, but that they had some structures to support it, because I feel like over several successions of provosts, I feel like they've gone to conferences and, you know, heard that term and brought it back, but not heard anything about creating infrastructure around the support for those initiatives necessarily, or at least not embodying that necessarily at my own institution. And so it's really interesting to hear that that happened for you. And I was wondering if whether you think working with or that sort of adjacency to the material sciences, like do you think that helped them understand your work, you know, because they were seeing it in relation to other work that was being done? Or do you think that just helped you because you were finding a way, you were sort of aligning yourself with what the institution was looking for?
I mean, I was hired primarily, not primarily, I would say partly because those consortiums, the groups were already established 5-6 years before I was hired. So we really owe it to the current provost to do that. So what they did was 6 areas. One was material and visual worlds, which was perfect for me. Because you know, I have training in design history and, you know, material culture. I wanted to go and teach design history, but I was finding this material and visual worlds. They wanted to teach materials, the humanities and the science level. Material science meets material culture, and so they already had that in place. And when I walked into that room, they actually said, okay, let's have an orientation. And I found that group as transdisciplinary areas of excellence. That's a huge mouthful title, but you know, there are 8 or 9 professors sitting in the same room. One is an anthropologist, the other is a you know, classical studies person. There's a material scientist in the room. So I didn't have to do the work. There's also research assistants. A research assistants that means research grant specialist. So in that room, everything was there, and it took us like several weeks to kickstart everything. And then they actually provided, the university, the campus itself provided us financial assistance for projects, seed grants. So #1 step was seed grant. Seed grant would allow us to together and do a small project within a $5,000 budget. Then next we would package that inside a larger grant, and we won a regional grant, for instance, right? Because we had prior work to show, and then from that we won an international level grant, National Endowment for Humanities. So I was lucky enough to be, you know, arriving at that campus at a time where these groups or transdisciplinary areas of excellence existed. It was a perfect fit because I tried to do at my previous institution, Art Institute of Chicago, which didn't have that. So my information design work particularly required me to do collaborations with people from other disciplines. So in this campus, it was set up for me.
Yeah, I think that that's great. And I just want to pause and note that I think one of the things we've heard from several people is that they're not at the same institution they started at, or they're moving from the first institution. And so sometimes it really is about not necessarily one institution being quote unquote better empirically than others, but one institution being a better fit for, specific faculty, for specific faculty interests. And your interests change over time and develop over time. And so what felt like a good fit 15 years ago might, 15 years on feel maybe not as good a fit. And so I do think that trying to find for newer faculty, especially if it's newer faculty who are feeling uncomfortable in their institution, or maybe like it isn't a good fit, I think one of the things to take away from hearing all of our panelists is that it makes a big difference whether or not we're sort of able to align our own work with the interests of the institution, and having that fit and having that support can be, can really make an enormous difference. So I want to pivot and just sort of, I talked to Michael here because Michael's done, I'm sure I couldn't even count how many tenure and promotion evaluations you've done at this point. And I just,
52.
How many? What?
Sorry, I have to report to my provost on this kind of thing. And I just finished my 52nd since 2002, and I'm starting my 53rd next week. So,
I feel tired just hearing that.
I look out at the other panelists, especially those of you who just got full professor. Welcome to your future.
Yeah, exactly. I'm about to work on one right now, but I'm wondering, I have kind of a two-part question for you, Michael. First, I'm just wondering what you're looking for from somebody who's primarily engaged in professional or creative practice, or sort of what you see in those dossiers. And secondly, I just want to note that as somebody who has not done nearly as many as Michael, but is certainly doing several a year, I have stopped accepting any where the institution doesn't provide their own criteria, because I feel it's really unfair to the candidate. And this sort of blanket, would this person get tenure at your institution, is just ridiculous because they're not at my institution. And so I also just had I see we're on the same wavelength. So if you could sort of speak to some of those challenges, Michael, that'd be great.
Oh, good golly. So you set me up really well, Aaris. Thanks very much. So I've been taking notes as Allan and Meaghan and Tashika and Gökhan have been speaking, and I've got some notes of my own in response to the questions that you've sent. But I'll start out. I'm so glad you broached the topic of you talked about refusing to review people their own institutions' tenure and promotion criteria is not well articulated, or you get the unfortunately infamous, would they get tenure at your institution, or would they get tenure at a peer institution? And so I've gotten to the point, and I've been doing this now for about 15 years, where I will actually criticize not the person who is going up for T&P, as we say here at North Texas, tenure and promotion. I'll criticize the tenure committee. And I think I know maybe I sound like a little bit of a hothead on this, but it's actually something I'd like to call for colleagues and peers across the design educators community to consider doing. And I think it really abrogates an enormous amount of responsibility on that tenure and promotion committee when you don't clearly articulate criteria. Or the other thing that I've seen quite a bit is you'll get tenure and promotion criteria for, I will say, one of us who is a designer. And I think the other thing I'm hearing from all of you guys is that, yes, you are a design practitioner, you have a practice, you have clients, or as kind of, Allan and Meaghan, Tashika, you've all talked about this, or you're exhibiting your work. Gökhan, you sound like you're doing things maybe a little more similar to what we do here. We're also a tier 1 research university. I'm an information designer myself. I also am a design historian, and I run our user experience and interaction design program here at the University of North Texas. anyway, to get back to what Aaris was talking about. So specifying criteria really well up front is a really crucial thing to do. But, and Aaris, I'm trying to make sure I get your questions answered here. So one of the things that I look for is what I call really well contextualized storytelling. Can you articulate, and not just can you, you have to. Why have you taken on what you've taken on? So however it has been made manifest. So whether you are exhibiting work like Tashika was talking about, or you have the kind of client base that Allan and his colleagues are trying to facilitate, you're overseeing the work of students in a workshop as what Meaghan is doing, or if you're doing inter and transdisciplinary work where, you know, what Gökhan was just talking about, where materials science meets materials culture. And by the way, Gökhan, it sounds like you've got one heck of an enlightened provost and upper level leadership there. That's something that I don't see a lot, and I think we need to try to advocate more for. So I'll break it down really simply. In terms of people, whether you're going up from assistant to associate or associate to full, you have to get to, and I'm borrowing this from a friend of mine named Brian Sullivan, who's a user experience design researcher here in Dallas. And he talks about you've got to get to the who, the what, and the wow. And the wow part is why is whatever you've done, how have you explained the significance of that? And so explaining the significance, this is the effect that an exhibition had if you're someone who's done what Tashika is talking about doing, or this is how I helped a client improve their market share. If you're doing something like Allan's doing, I don't mean to oversimplify any of this. It's just easy to say these things. Or if you're talking about my role on this grant writing team helped secure funding through this channel because I contributed this. Like Gökhan, I don't know if you were a co-project investigator or a project investigator on any of those grants or that kind of thing. So get to the who, get to the what that you did, qualify the significance. That's really, really crucial. And I think you also need to speak really well. And one of the things that I look for, how well have you described, how well have you told the story about the role, or usually for us, roles, plural, that you played in a given project. So, okay, terrific. You won an award. You were recognized by your peers. And by the way, winning awards, and I'm smiling when I say this, I've heard at least 6 different provosts literally say this. It makes it easier for them to, quote, keep score, unquote. And one of the things sometimes that I've seen that people forget to do when they present their materials, and I've seen this again at the assistant to associate level, but also at the associate to full level, is you say you had a piece accepted into Graphice, or you had a piece or a campaign featured in print or CA or wherever it was. I get that. That's terrific. I'm a professional design educator. I've had a professional practice for 35 years, but my provost has a background in architecture and urban studies, or biology, or physics, or mathematics. So if you don't tell the story, if you don't get to the who, the what, and the wow part is the significance. So I know how hard it is to get something into CA, or to get something into print or Graphice or whatever it is. My provost doesn't. And my dean may not. My dean has a background right now in art education. She will understand, golly, this is, and I've had her ask me, I've had other deans, how shall I say this, back channel communications during the tenure process. Can you please qualify the significance of this? And so you find yourself saying, well, what we do, and so I'm the editor of the AIGA DEC journal, or I'm the co-editor with my colleague Keith Owens of Dialectic. And you get into things like rejection rates, how hard was it to get in? So that kind of stuff. I should probably stop there, Aaris. I think maybe I answered part of one of your questions, but hit me with the second one again, if you please.
So, so I think you did a pretty good job of touching on a lot of what we've talking about. You talked about what you want to see in the dossier, and I think one of the things that I wanted to just note based on what you said is that the burden is on the applicant or the faculty member, because especially for external reviewers, you know, I meet people sometimes later, but I rarely know the people whose work I'm reviewing. And so the easier you can make it for the reviewer and the better you tell that story, I think it really helps your external reviewers help you make its case as you're going up for tenure. But the other thing I just wanted to note is that it's not just a story about individual significance, but there's a through line, and how your work really affects, you know, how your research trajectory and your work affects your teaching, how it affects your professional practice, how it affects maybe interdisciplinary collaborations. And those are things that the more we can name and be and talk about to other people who aren't just in this room, who aren't just graphic designers, the more clarity we have, really the easier it is for that writer. And I would just say that the two people on this call I did reviews for, and that's part of the reason they're here, is because I knew really specifically that they could speak to some of these things. So I was wondering, Gökhan, can you say a little bit about putting your materials together? Because you have a range of things you do, and I thought that your description of how they related together was just really excellent. Like, I didn't feel like I had to do any work to think about how maybe your student exhibitions related to this work you're doing with this interdisciplinary group of educators. You've done that for me. Did you have help with that as well, and just really good support?
I think I really owe that to my mentor. We were assigned a faculty mentor early on in the process, and to, you know, create our stories. And I really benefited. I worked 2-3 years. The first year review, I mean the first third year review, for instance. Up to that point, I was constantly revising my story. Also, you know, the new research work was developing, so that my story was to tell people that I'm not doing, you know, random stuff, which looks like a lot of different things. So I really got help in that, and as more and more research actually developed in the direction that I was going. Early on, I thought I would be maybe doing more scholarly publications, book chapters, and things like that. But very quickly, I realized my path is producing results, the information design and grant funding. So it made my job really easy. And the things that I wrote about are connected to the idea of my thesis, which is my research itself is using information design to communicate science and other things. So publications, scholarly publications, we're talking about the work. Exhibitions, we're talking about the information work. So information design being kind of like the backbone of what I do. And the artist book, one of the recent artist book I did was centered around it. Although I come from the background of design history and book arts, in this institution, I was lucky enough that everything converged into this path, and we actually, you know, kind of little by little grew it, and all these things started making my job easier to articulate that I'm doing information design for articulating knowledge domains and bridging together knowledge, different diverse knowledge domains. So it has been an ongoing process. As I was doing the work, then I would sit back and rewrite my story and redo my portfolio. I mean, that was a parallel task. As I was, you know, like developing my resume, I was constantly rewriting the story and rearranging the tiles.
Yeah, I think that's great. Michael, did you have a comment for him?
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad to sort of tie together what you had said before, Aaris, and what Gökhan just articulated. So I think it's incredibly important to have a really effective tenure mentor, and maybe even two if you can do it. And it's tricky, I've been one several times, both inside my institution and outside of it. And one of the things, and you made this point earlier, Aaris, and I have it here in my notes of something that I wanted to talk about. I'm going to try to do this with my fingers, and it's really hard. I'm trying to braid them together. So this idea that Aaris, you touched on, and Gökhan, you just talked about it with regard to your information design work. One of the things that I talk to people about, and one of the things that I'm looking for when I review people's materials, I say, how do the threads of whatever you're working on, how do they intertwine? So I want to be able to see that whatever it is, maybe you're interested in, okay, one of my big issues is children's healthcare, particularly in places that don't have it really well, like right here in Texas and in Dallas. But okay, that's just me. But whatever it is that you're doing, I want to see how that thread, however you're investigating it, how does it touch other threads? How has it affected the work of other people that you're working with on your own campus and or in your own community? But I want to see, as I go through a dossier, and Aaris, you were articulating this before, hopefully you've done a darn good job in your own dossier of telling that story. Again, I'll say it again, how your threads intertwine. So, whatever, so maybe you're doing something, a research project, or you're doing a participatory design project with somebody doing something in your community, or groups across campus. I do a lot of work with our humanities faculty, particularly our anthropologists here. But it is something, and Aaris, you talked about this too, the onus of responsibility is very much on the person going up for tenure and or promotion to tell that story in a way where I, as a reviewer who don't know you and who don't know your institution, I want to see how the threads that you're weaving, or maybe I should say spinning, how you're braiding them together. So how do your threads, pardon my little bit of Texan here, how do your threads weave together and become a rope?
Yeah, I think that's great. Tashika, would you have any thoughts about both that, and maybe we heard about how the ideas you come into a job with in terms of what you think you're going to be doing, how you evolve, and you evolve as you figure out what the institution values. So did you feel like you evolved in terms of the kind of work you made? And then if you can just speak to, trying to tie some of these threads together and what that was like for you at your institution going up through the process.
Yeah, so when I first, well, for one, when I would say my second year on tenure track, I was told that I had to write this grant, basically because the other design professor was full professor. And so he had did all the grant writing he was going to do, but we needed some new equipment. And so, how things happen sort of like behind closed doors. And I was told, wow, if you get this grant, this is like sort of like a shoe-in, as far as like tenure goes. So that was that. I didn't know what I was doing. So being a PI on a pretty, large grant, that helped. And then from there on, since that happened, like maybe my third semester, I wanted to get more into like writing and publishing. And like I stated before, that was something that, as far as like a bigger, like, history book project, I wasn't quite sure even how to take on that. So I use conferences as sort of a way, and being invited to do lectures as a way to sort of keep up with my research and my writing. One thing that I do want to say, I want to note that was maybe mentioned earlier, was sort of the difference between like, if you had a tier 1 research 1 institution, my institution was 2, sort of, there was a small percentage between like your teaching load and your professional activity, like a 10% difference. So it's more of a teaching institution. So I think like being aware of that and sort of what the demands are at those type of institutions are important. And so then I started, kind of putting my energy towards that, although I wasn't able to do like a bigger, maybe writing or publishing project that I would do at maybe a research 1, just sort of kind of focusing on smaller like writing projects. I looked at like lectures and presentations, you have to write those things, right? So that was something else that was important. And one thing I do want to say is that also a lot of institutions do mid-tenure reviews, which usually happens at the third, sort of like the mid-year point. And I think that that process, if you sort of approach that as if you're actually going up, you get more out of it if you take it seriously and you really put together a really tight dossier. I found that that process very educational for me at the time. And so I learned a lot about, and I would say that my approach sort of shifted a little bit. And the thing that I learned was something that Michael talked about a lot was at that mid-year point, I had a hard time connecting my research, my making, my professional practice, all those things into like, okay, so what happens in the classroom? How do you tell that story? And that's something I really struggled with. And not until that mid-tenure point where I just sort of kind of shifted my energy on, maybe presenting at conferences, doing lectures, things like that, and on my creative practice, and then trying to figure out ways to kind of make that work into the classroom. And then that's when things started happening, because prior to that, I was clueless. I had no idea how to make those things sort of work. It actually felt like I was doing more work, to be honest, because everything seemed separate. And so once I figure out how to make things sort of come together, and I don't want to say themes, that's like a really bad, that's not the right word, but just sort of like, what's the umbrella? What's the sort of big idea? What's the main thing? What's at the core of what I'm talking about? And how does that seep into the classroom? So once I figured that out for myself, it actually made it a lot easier for me to write about it, right? To tell that story. But that's something that I had struggled with prior to like the mid-tenure point.
So you felt that even though I'm sure as you were putting that material together for the third year dossier, you might not have been like, oh, this is great, I'm really enjoying this. You, in hindsight, or as you went through the process, you found that the process itself to be instructive and useful as you were then considering your next few years until you went up for tenure and promotion. That sounds like that the process itself helped you because you were forced to articulate some of these things before it was that sort of do or die moment. Does that feel right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I definitely didn't have the answers as I was writing. So that was something that sort of came out in the discussion in my review, was that things, seemed a little disjointed, or it wasn't clear. I would say, like, it wasn't really clear what was at the nucleus, what was at the core of what I was actually doing. Like they appreciated, different things and different projects, but it was, again, back to what Michael was saying, it was that umbrella, right? It's like, here's this main thing that you're working with, and here's all these other sort of parts that make up the bigger topic or the larger discussion. And that was something that became clearer to me. I was able to figure out after that review. Because prior to it, I didn't know how to make those things fit together.
Yeah, so I think I think one of the things that's great about what you said is that you were also very open to that process, right? As you went through it, you were open to the fact that maybe the committee said, we love all these parts, but we don't quite understand these. And then it made you think, how can I tell this story in a way that umbrella is more obvious for my readers or whoever happens to be looking, whether it's at my institution or another. And that's really key. And I also want to just note that everybody in this session, I thank you all for sort of your generosity to say that you didn't have it figured out from day one, right? I feel like sometimes at these conferences, we hear from people who, like, we know the names, and it seems like, well, they had it figured out from the beginning. How can I possibly do this? And the truth is that we struggled, some of us struggled and had to move to different institutions. Some of us struggled at different points along the way. Sometimes I struggle after tenure and promotion to figure out, now, what do I do? I mean, we're all always learning and sort of responding to feedback. And so, it's fantastic that everybody's sort of willing to share some of those things, because I think that's so helpful for people in the beginning. Yeah.
I'm so glad you're saying that, Aaris. Thank you so much. It's this, I mean, we're designers, we're the kind of like firefighters running toward a burning building. We're supposed to run towards something when something is failing and when something doesn't work. And if you haven't ever stubbed your toe or couldn't figure it out, Tashika, you articulated that so well. I was in that position many years ago at my third year review. I couldn't figure out how to weave my threads together into a rope yet, but it really helped me, as you know, writing about it, presenting about it, having to explain it to others really helped me figure that out. So Aaris and Tashika both, I thank the heck out of both of you guys for bringing that up. Yeah, this idea that somehow you come out of grad school and you're going to know how to do this magically, no way. That's a big myth that you guys just busted. So thanks hugely for doing that.
Yeah, on that Mythbuster, I just want to add that I feel like designers often think that we're the only ones who struggle through this because we have the MFA rather than the PhD. And I have the privilege of being very good friends with folks in other departments. And I will say PhD, MFA, you know, we're all still learning our way through how to get through this process and the different paths different people take and the different institutions we're at. So if anyone's watching this and is feeling a little bit overwhelmed, like know that we've all been there at various times in our careers and, you know, everybody's made it through. So Meaghan, I wanted to just hear a little bit from you. I know you had a lot of client work and I'm just wondering about some of the things, if you can sort of touch on some of the things that other panelists have been talking about in relation to doing this kind of client work and being at a sort of research institution and whether or not you felt like you had to kind of shift your agenda, or was it shifting your storytelling, or both? How did that work for you?
Yeah, I would say I felt like I really learned a lot in the job about what was expected of research. I think prior to working at Virginia Tech, I'd never done anything with grants, for instance. And one of my favorite parts about the job that I do have is that I've been able to have lots of interdisciplinary collaborations. So I was on grants where you worked with a sculptor and an engineer on creating protective body panels for a firefighting humanoid robot, and then worked later on with architects on, you know, creating the visual interface design for a prototype for a smart home that ended up winning a international solar decathlon in Dubai, sort of thing. And that's not anything I ever thought I would ever be doing. And other years working with performing artists on immersive theatrical experiences and illustrating things for that. So I just think I said yes a lot. And there were also some institutions and supports in place at Virginia Tech. For instance, the Institute for Creativity, Arts and Technology is one here where they really brought people together. So you might not know a computer scientist or an engineer that was working on things, but by having some places where you could meet other individuals interested in working together really helped pave the way for those opportunities. So I think it's not just about those mentorships, but like sort of seeking out some of those opportunities. I'd also say, you know, that design competitions, I think I'd entered one or two before, and now I enter them all the time just because I want that peer review. And one thing I've been doing a lot more of trying to get better at recently is writing. And this is something I really feel like I fumbled my way through at first. So I think I started, my first presentation was like a Picha Kucha at CCAC, which is a small friendly conference. And if you're just trying to get started, it's such a warm, welcoming environment. I'd recommend checking it out. And so I built my way up to presenting at other conferences, and I've been really active with the AIGA Design Educators community. And there was another really wonderful supportive group there. And it helped me understand a lot of different ways that an academic career could look, that there wasn't just one set path. I also think since getting tenure, I'm really trying to do elevate the design writing. And thanks to Aaris and everyone at Design Incubation, I participated in the Design Incubation Book Fellowship this summer. And that really helped me understand better how to pitch writing and break down some of the larger scale projects into more manageable chunks. And submitting to Dialectic and some other journals, Dialectic I have to compliment because they give you feedback. So whether you're accepted or rejected, they will tell you how to do better. It's not just a yes or a no kind of situation. And even when you're getting those no's, figuring out how you can get to those yes, I think was really helpful for me. And pre-tenure for me, I really had this approach of try all the things, you know, interdisciplinary collaboration, grants, client work, writing, et cetera. And so now I'm trying to kind of slow down and really think about what I want to do, you know, have some larger, longer term projects, while still maintaining that client practice.
Seems like this idea of being open and being flexible, which I think we tell our students all the time, right? And we tell our students, we're very comfortable in, if it's about our professional work, getting that feedback and shifting and realigning. I think that sometimes maybe because we're just sort of so unsure of our process, some people feel like maybe we get a little more precious about our work when it's academic related, or when it's supposed to count sort of in that sphere. And one of the things I'm hearing from everybody on this call is that staying open to that feedback from your institution, from your department, from your dean is so key. And we are really good at that, but sometimes we leave that hat on the side when we're being evaluated by our institutions, as opposed to maybe getting that client feedback. We all know what to do with client feedback, but maybe not so much what to do with the institutional feedback and or the feedback from, say, a journal or a publisher. I mean, I always say I have a boneyard of crazy ideas that, deans and editors and, publishers and all sorts of people all thought were not as cool as I thought they were at the time. But, it's just keeping going and figuring out the support systems and maybe collaboration. And I think it's so much about getting through seems to be attitude here. And so I want to mark that it's, again, not just about knowing what to do, but it's about that attitude of flexibility and connecting with the resources that are around us.
Well, and I'd also say with those resources, I really feel lucky that design educators seem to be so supportive, with AIGA and design incubation and all of these different groups. I have always felt like everyone wanted me to succeed, not saying that no one's competitive or cutthroat in that way, but that I really think if you want to connect with other people, there are groups out there that will help build you up and guide you along the way, even if you don't have those supports at your institution. I think Allan and I didn't have that, example tenured graphic design professor to guide the way. And so seeing how it worked for other people really helped me.
Yeah, that's great. Allan, you want to just speak to that sort of lack of maybe some of that. Sounds like some people had a little bit more of that institutional infrastructure and you just didn't. And you've also, you and I and Michael have certainly been around long enough to have also seen the things shift in terms of expectations. So could you just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that third year review was really crucial for me as well. That was the year that I actually is when I rejected what they wanted of me, because they told me to do all these things. And I actually said to them, I don't do that. That's not what I do. I'm a maker. I'm a graphic designer. I think where my important lies is that connection to theory and apply. And I just argued with my mentor, and my mentor actually was like, this is game changing for you. You need to continue what you are doing because you've articulated it in a way that no one else has explained what you do as a graphic designer and the importance of it. I have to stress that narrative is so important that I think those going up for tenure should always have communication with the department, your department and your chair. Your chair is huge in the process of writing that evaluation and, and summarizing the external reviewers and really understanding, making them understand why you do what you do. And the way that I'd like to just share, the way that I look at my professional work and the way that I evaluated it as research is acts like a scientist. I had a hypothesis of a procedure that I did that started in grad school. I was really interested in situationist theory. And I was wondering how can I make graphic design that actually critiques itself? Was something I was really interested in as part of my research. And the studio work is the evidence of that. So I always like, you know, I've always looked at the studio as an experimental lab. This is a way that I make work, and it's not really like everyone else's perspective, but I'm interested in it. And I'm gonna make work that tries to do it. And if it fails, it still goes in the dossier. I mean, it's an experiment, and it's supporting documents to this perspective that we all have. And articulating that, yes, takes forever, because I thought, I have no idea what I went to grad school not to teach. I had no intentions to teach whatsoever. I was working in the field for so long. I wanted a new process, and I was not going to give that up once I got to academia. That was the crazy thing, because part of it was like, well, you got to write grants. And I'm like, fine, I'll write a grant. And I wrote grants in the beginning of it. And then at that third year review, I'm like, but I'm not comfortable with this. Great, I got this grant. But how does that really push what I do in some ways, or add to the conversation of design? So I pushed back a little bit, and I actually became really comfortable with the process at that point, because what I kept looking at it as, and even going up to full, even though I was like, I really don't care if I go up to full, like, I just want to continue what I'm doing. And I love the professional practice. I love mixing it with teaching. But the idea that, what I was going to say, that the idea that, you continue to do what you do, and it's framed within that umbrella, is really, really important to just stay focused on that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, anyway, that's all I wanted to say. And we have to educate institutions, I think. That's the most, what I've learned, even reading dossiers, like now, yes, Michael, and now that I'm reviewing, that question is, are they going to get tenure at your, it's the stupidest question you can respond to. I never respond to it. I actually don't even address that question. But I think everyone's tenurable if you just are able to find that umbrella and have an argument for your work. And awards and things, yes, it makes it easier for them to understand. And you might have to do that as part of the process, especially, I think, as a professional, if professional practice is a large part of it. But really, it's about, like, what ties everything together, and what's that narrative, even if the stuff doesn't get awards. Is everything connected? Do you really, are you focused on something? And it doesn't have to be successful. It could be a constant experiment that just promotes the dialogue in graphic design. I think that's the important thing. That's how I evaluate, honestly. And that's how I think I've changed too in evaluating. Like, I don't get, okay, great, like, good awards and stuff, and I've done it too, but is this narrative that this person's following really pushing some type of dialogue within graphic design? Because that's where I'll start to write. I think this is an interesting perspective. We don't see this, or things like that. Or so anyway, I've taken up too much. Sorry, Aaris.
No, I think that was fantastic. And I think you're, talking also about the fact that maybe you do have to do a few of those things that, like, enter awards or write grants that maybe aren't quite the right fit, and maybe, but you don't have to do them forever. And maybe the way I think about it is, if I have to do a few things that are going to make my institution happy, and in exchange for that, I get tenure and promotion, and basically are able to do the work I want to do and explore these crazy ideas that, like, are completely tangential to everything else for the rest of my career. Yeah, okay, I'll do it. Thanks. Like, no problem. Because to me, that is so totally worth it, even if it means a little bit of flexibility or pivoting along those 6 years. As someone who's come through that and spent more of my time now tenured than untenured, I can say, like, my gosh, it's so worth it. Like, now we can do all these crazy projects And it's a, it's just in my annual report. It's, it doesn't have the same weight. So
yeah, I just think we just have to be braver to educate these people. I mean, not these people, but I mean, we're evaluated by people that sometimes really don't get what we do. But that gives us the opportunity to redefine that process in some ways. You can convince them that this is the way that I think you should be looking at this, at my position and what I do. And so I think sometimes we just have to be brave enough to talk to our own institutions and educate them, because I think they're as uneducated about, about what we do half the time, honestly. I've seen it and I'm like, wow, okay, you really don't get it out of that conversation. So
I think the other thing that I really want to reinforce or celebrate in what Allan and Aaris, what you guys are talking about, part of that process of sort of, trying things, being brave enough to try things. So I picked up this slang years ago when I was in grad school, which was 30 years ago. You got to celebrate your own risks. And part of that is, I think we learn this as designers in a variety of different settings and manifestations and things that we've tried. You got to figure out what not to do. And sometimes you got to push into an area and sort of realize, golly, okay, my institution wants me to do that, or I've got a mentor that's saying this would be a good idea, but that ain't me. And so you got to try it on for size, and doggone it, if that apparel doesn't fit, take it off and try something else. But I think Aaris's point is really worth reiterating too. Once you get tenured and once you get promoted, then you can try that stuff. You can go out and pick your analogy, skate on the thin ice, or go in the parts of the desert where you don't think there's going to be much water, but there is. You just have to find it. I think that stuff's really crucial. The other thing that I'm hearing as you guys speak, and I think it's really important in terms of, telling your own story to somebody who doesn't understand what we do, is you can talk about, and I've got Mr. Orange here, which means I write down something that's important. It's in Mr. Orange. How has what you've done affected change in a positive way? And as I hear you speak, Allan, and Aaris, as I hear you reinforce, that's what I'm hearing. You get right in your own head. When you look yourself in the mirror every morning, you say, yeah, what I'm doing here, I've affected change in a positive way. And I think once you can sort of throw your arms around that, you realize, yeah, heck, that's me. I'm being true to myself. That's going to help fuel your path to tenure and promotion. And I'll close with this. One of the things that I've tried to talk to people about as I've mentored people, and as I've written letters of assessment for various people going up from assistant to associate or associate to full, if it looks to me as an external reviewer, if you're trying to be somebody or sort of walk in shoes that don't fit, you're trying to be somebody that you're not, holy mackerel, that's obvious. And that's not a place where you should try to go. I tried to, I'll use my own example. I'm kind of maybe a little bit like Gökhan. I'm an information design junkie. I use it all the time. I love it. I tie it together with design history. And when I've tried to walk away from that and some of what I do, it's just, that ain't me. And it took me a while. It was sort of like smacking myself between my eyes with a 2x4 sometimes. And you pull back and you think, why the heck couldn't I see that? Well, sometimes it's because you're the last person in the world. It's that thing where you got to pull yourself up above yourself to about 200 feet and look down and sort of think, holy mackerel, what's that person trying to do? That's not who that person is. Get back on the path that person should be on.
What I love is that we could of course go on and talk about these things forever, but we want to be mindful that our audience has other presentations to watch as well. So Allan and Michael both sort of addressed my final question just naturally, and I want to come back to our other panelists and just ask, like, what would you tell somebody who had come from professional practice and was has a tenure track job and was in these first few years? Is there something that you're either hearing, from other panelists, or you can think about from your own experience? Like, is there something that you would want to close and tell them? And Gökhan, I'm going to start with you. And I also noticed that you have, I think, an orange marker there. So you and Michael might be, yeah, look at that. You're fast friends with the orange markers, but yeah, there we go. Tell us what would you tell someone who had just been hired or had just moved to a different institution?
Well, I mean, in my case, it was a little bit like it fit like a glove, because the information design practice I was doing in my institution didn't quite fit. That I had started, truly got off the ground when I had 1 year of visiting professorship at another institution. And it happened there that I got my first grant, wrote my first grant. So in my case, when I found this new research institution, I was ready to continue and actually increase my research output in that area. I think the first thing that I did in the orientation was looking for a group of people that I could collaborate with, and they had already provided. I had to go to either the material visual worlds or the smart energy, where they do battery research. It looked like material visual worlds was the thing to do. And they really made it so easy to orient for me. So I didn't have to do much. I just went to those bi-weekly meetings where they had some ideas thrown to the table about doing work where my information design could be part of. It was very quick. Within the first 3 months or so, we were writing the grant, and my information design was being kind of contributing to that idea. And I just found a new practice there. I actually expanded what I've been doing at maybe a smaller scale to full-blown, grant after grant, project after project, moving from one group of professors, researchers, to another group of researchers. And then finally, I found a place where the Institute of Materials Research, where they do battery, which is a physics and chemistry of rechargeable batteries. So they're very specialized. Okay, but there's a very general thing behind it, which is talking about physics and chemistry using information design in general, and that explains all kinds of things. So I would say I was just trying to find the small research domain immediately. And I was lucky enough that they came to me almost, they say, here we are. So it was an easy transition for me. And my struggle in my previous position was, it is a highly regarded art school, but it's an art school. And when I wanted to do information design, we had to take the students to a research campus. We were in Chicago, and there was Northwestern University. We had to bus the school students there to talk to the other professors, to do that kind of collaborative thing. And when I think the biggest thing for me was to make the decisions to make the move. That was a big decision.
I would just pause on that and say that is fantastic advice. If we don't, especially getting into academia, you don't always know enough, not only about the institution, but about yourself and your own practice at that moment. And let's be honest, we're trying to get jobs, right? So yeah. making that, being brave enough, or being able to make that move and sort of recognize in a new institution what will be his best fit, I think is so important. If somebody, say, watching this is just feeling out of place, really truly out of place in their institution.
I mean, moving from the heart of Chicago to a rural campus in New York State, I had to call my mentor, who at the time, design historian Victor Margolin. And I asked, I have never heard of this place. I have heard of SUNY, but I've never heard of Binghamton. And said, this is a college, it's a university with all these departments, it's a research university. So that made my job easier to make the move.
Great. Tashika, do you want to tell us a little, like what would you tell somebody in those first couple years? Do you have any advice or thoughts, or even you can address changing institutions, whatever feels most, most urgent at this moment for you?
Oh, the first thing is don't forget about the classroom. Don't forget about the students that you're going to be teaching and having them be a part of that process. So whether it's research, whether it's you're trying out different ideas for projects, I think sometimes I know I did. I would say personally what I did was I kept those things too separate. And then in my defense, I think it was because I didn't know how to incorporate the two. I had self-doubt, like, oh, they may not be interested in this, whatever. So I would say, for one, don't forget about, using, the classroom as a space to experiment and explore, some of these ideas, right? The next thing I would say is, I think, sort of staying true to yourself. And I agree that, there are things that, you can try and try your hand at and see if that works. But I do think sort of being true to yourself and what you're interested in, like what Allan said, I think it's really important. And I agree, I'm a maker at heart. I never looked at myself as being, I used to say that I'm the least academic that I know. Not sure if that's true, but in my mind, it's because I really enjoy and I get my joy out of making. I had to sort of figure out a way to kind of make that work in the academia setting. And saying that, once I did sort of figure out how to make those connections to my research, which is about discovering Black people who made significant contributions to the field of design that has been overlooked. And at the time I wasn't teaching history. So it's like, well, how do I do that? So what I did was I made sure I let them know I'm interested in teaching history. And so once I was able to do that, then, wrote smaller grant, trying to come up with collaborative projects for my students to where they were doing some of the research, making zines about the research and things like that. And then now, this transition for me, going into a research one institution is come at a really great time, because now I'm really focusing on that research. I'm really focusing on writing and publishing, and something that I've always been interested in, but never could really figure it out. And so all those talks and those lectures, that I talked about that I've been doing a lot over the past few years has sort of helped me transition in this way. But yeah, I'm still making, and that's still, it's gonna always be a huge part of my practice. But I think the biggest challenge is sort of finding a way to balance it out, right? I mean, if you're a person that's sort of focused on, just researching, you want to sort of stay in that area, and I think that's fine too. But I think, trying to figure out, again, where things overlap and when the connections are, and just being true to yourself and to your craft. And I do think it's important to, one thing that I learned at my other institution that I wasn't really good at, or I didn't maybe make much of an effort to do, is to sort of reach out to people outside of my department. I really was, I wouldn't say I felt isolated, but I didn't know how to. So this next journey, I'm like, okay, I'm reaching out to people in sociology or in, like other departments and areas that I'm, actually have research interests, to make those connections. Because interdisciplinary work is something I'm really interested in as well.
Great, that's so much good advice. I particularly like that idea of reaching out. Sometimes we're so focused on what we're doing that it's hard to do that. And I love the idea that you stay a maker, right? That's your passion, even when your output or your dissemination maybe varies from that a little bit, that's the thing that kind of grounds you and that you keep coming back to. Meaghan, do you have any last thoughts for people who might be starting this journey or in the beginning stages of this journey?
Yeah, and I think particularly for people maybe doing more with professional practice or in emerging technologies, you can be creative about how to get your work peer reviewed, or how to get quantifiable data, and also start early on capturing that data. And so it might be something like, how many unique website visitors did a site you designed get, or how many downloads did an app you designed have, or how many items were sold. And I'm also seeing some positive changes and just maybe the baby stages in promotion and tenure about contributions to diversity and inclusion having a little bit more weight. And if you're a change maker at your institution, maybe you can push for more weight to doing things for nonprofits or things for social good, because I do think institutions care about that. And if you care about that, then you can make that a priority. Some schools can also see things like big name clients and have impact there. I'd also think about local, regional, national, or international. So we didn't get too much into the national, international conversation, but for associate at Virginia Tech, you have to be known at the national level, and for full, you have to be known at the international level. So even though it's just as easy to design a logo for someone in San Francisco as it is for someone down the block, now that we have Zoom everything, it's going to count for more if I have a client in San Francisco. So, and also just that reminder of being able to explain this to anyone. I was always told, make sure that a biologist or an engineer can understand your dossier. And my last little piece, good luck, and don't be scared to ask for support.
Yeah, but all of you have been so generous about giving advice. And as I said, I think we could, we're also passionate about this. We could go on and talk about these issues, at least another hour, but I am gonna have to stop it here because I know the folks at home do want to get on to watching some of these other presentations. But I want to thank everybody for coming on and being part of this session. And one of the things, my last thought to all of you who are watching is that you have all of our names now. And so as people are looking for reviewers and or external mentors or just some pointers, like I think you'll see that everybody's really friendly and generous, and feel free. I'm going to just say, put out a blanket statement, for the people in this session, but just generally, design education does tend to be a pretty friendly bunch, as some of our panelists have said. And feel free to reach out to somebody whose work you admire or who you're wondering how they got there and how they got through the tenure practice, because more often than not, they're going to be flattered and really happy to jump on a Zoom call and kind of take you through some of that and talk about your work. So we are going to just leave it there, and thank you to all the panelists. And I look forward to future conversations with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.